So welcome everyone to the Gary Neville Podcast, in the company tonight, of course, of Jamie Carragher. We've just watched Chelsea and Liverpool draw one each, and what conclusions, Gary, are you drawing?
Look, I think for both teams to have this fixture in the first game wouldn't have been ideal. I mean, if you just said to me, I came here actually with Manchester United, I think in Jose Mourinho's first season, it's not a fixture you want Stamford Bridge away, or if you're Chelsea, Liverpool obviously at home. So I would say for both teams, they probably walk away with a point and happy. I think there's an element of both teams that is frantic, lacking a little bit of order, but it is early in the season. Obviously, they've not finished in the transfer window yet. Maurizio Pochettino's a new manager, and Jurgen Klopp is trying to settle his team down. But what still surprises me for Liverpool is that is the most settled back five in the Premier League. I mean, I don't know how many games they've played together, and yet they still don't look like a world-class group, and they are a world-class group individually. If you look at them, you wouldn't sort of swap any of them, maybe Canate, but the other three are outstanding. The goalkeeper's fantastic. So that's still a surprise when I watch Liverpool, how many chances they concede. But I'd say it was a good game of football with obviously improvements to be made by both teams.
It is strange, Jamie, isn't it, that you, during the game, were talking so much about Liverpool defensively, because as Gary says, over both sides, the most familiar part of either lineup was the Liverpool defence. Defence, midfield, attack on either side. The ones we knew, the ones we picked in advance, were Liverpool. Yeah,
of course, but I mean, I'm not trying to defend them as in, I think they should be defending better at times individually. I'm looking at certain movements that certain players are playing at times, but when you look at Liverpool's front six, what it was sort of 3 or 4 years ago, you had probably the best defender from the front in Roberto Firmino, Salah and Mane. I mean, that three was not just about scoring goals, it was to understand when they pressed. And then you had a midfield three of sort of Jordan Henderson, Fabinho and Wijnaldum. That was the main three, I think, when you think of the Champions League win and the league title. I tell you what, that's a front six you'd like to play behind, isn't it? In terms of being a defender. Now, they weren't asked as many questions. They're getting asked a lot more questions now. So obviously there's going to be more goals conceded and there's going to be more mistakes made. But I do still feel that they can be better defensively and look a tougher nut to crack, if you like. It just feels so easy to go from one end of the pitch to the other against Liverpool. And that's been a big problem in the first couple of years under Jurgen Klopp and the last sort of 12 months under Klopp, and it feels like it's going to carry on again. And with Liverpool now, you'd almost feel like they were creating Klopp 2, if you like. The second team of Jurgen Klopp over these next 2 or 3 years. And it feels like they're going to have to go through a little bit of pain, like they did when Jurgen Klopp first came in, when games are going to be 2-2, 3-3, end to end. They're going to be the most exciting team to watch, but as a Liverpool fan, it's not exactly what you want.
You've just talked about that front six that obviously played, and that front three were kept together for a long time, but eventually had to be broken up, and obviously Firmino was the first one to suffer. At what point do you think Jurgen Klopp will look at that back 4 or 5 and think, right, okay, I need to just alter the dynamic of it? You've talked about bringing maybe a more solid across the back 4 defender that could play maybe left and right back and be more of a sort of what would be I'm thinking Azpilicueta or a Timbers just signed for Arsenal, that type of player that provides that almost bit more solidity. Do you think that's coming, or do you think it's something that he'll just persist with as it is at the moment?
Well, I think if Liverpool get a centre-back in, they will. I think in terms of Gomez and Matip behind those two centre-backs, they'll want a little bit more than that. But it's what type of defender you're bringing in. Is it a young player who likes to get on the ball, bring it out from the back? Maybe a left-footed one would provide Liverpool with a little bit of balance. But I just look at all the defenders now, and the real defender's always been Andy Robertson. He's been the one that really snarls and get after people, but he's been running up and down that line for 5 or 6 years now. It takes its toll. And, Trent, we know is never going to be in the team for his defensive abilities. Van Dijk is not quite the same. We'd accept that. So I just think in there they're going to ask questions a little bit more without that protection that they'll need. And they just need someone just now and again just to steady the ship in there and just win the 1v1 battles rather than looking to get forward and get on the ball.
If I was a Chelsea fan, Gary, and they've had a miserable old time for quite a long time now, I'd be walking down the King's Road now thinking, this could be all right.
I agree. I mean, I was a little bit worried about them in the first half an hour. It was a change of system which came out of the blue. We weren't expecting it this morning as we prepared for the game. But they grew in the game. And I thought that what there was, and it certainly wasn't there at the end of last season where, to be honest with you, they were disgraceful at times. I mean, they threw the towel in. They were persistent. they continue to keep going. I thought it summed up no better than the two midfield players who I thought really struggled in the first half hour, Fernandes and Gallagher. And in the end, you were probably looking at one of those to be man of the match for Chelsea, because they really did grow into the game and start to dominate it. And that Liverpool midfield three started to struggle to get a control of the game. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot to look forward to. What you did see about Chelsea, though, and Mauricio Pochettino will love this, is the frantic nature of Mudryk, of Maatsen, of Madueke if he came on, of Jackson. They run offside. They're sort of, if you like, they're too quick in what they play. They're not cold in the box. They're actually a little bit too emotional. They're not composed. But he will bring that to them, I think, in terms of how they work on the training pitch. So there's a lot to work with at Chelsea, a lot of potential. And I think they've got the right coach to turn that potential into what would be high quality and good performers.
I think it was really interesting looking at Chelsea, the setup in midfield, because obviously it looks like they're going to get the Caicedo deal over the line. It looks like he's going to play that Conor Gallagher role. And Enzo Fernandez may just play higher up. You know, and when you talk about the prices now of holding midfield players, you look at Declan Rice, Caicedo, it was probably all started in January with Enzo Fernandez coming in. But, I mean, we give him man of the match. I mean, he was really good in that number 8 position, if you like. So we're really interested in the dynamic there going forward. And when you look at Fernandez and Caicedo as a midfield pair, it's pretty tasty, isn't it?
I think the one thing for Chelsea, and Peter, you asked me the question in the first half, I actually think with Thiago Silva, I think it's a bit of a necessity for them to play because of the fact that they haven't got experience through the team, and you just need someone sometimes to look over your shoulder and feel like a comfort blanket. I know we probably needed that as young players. So if you've got Colwill one side and you've got Disasi the other as an example, you do need those fantastic wing-backs. And we saw fantastic wing-backs for Chelsea today, Chilwell and James, but, and there is a but, they've both gone off in the game, first game of the season. And that will really destroy Mauricio Pochettino's plans, because if you're going to play wing-backs, they have to be outstanding players with high quality who attack like wingers and defend like full-backs, and they do that. So that is the big question mark, I think. If those two can stay fit and you can have Thiago Silva in the middle of a young pair alongside him, and then you put Caicedo and Fernandes in there, and then you've got some young, bright forwards. It could be a really exciting season for Chelsea, but those wing-backs are crucial, and if they lose them, the whole thing could fall apart a little bit.
Yeah, there'll be some anxiety over that. I think they started together just 6 times in the Premier League last year, and of course, sadly, they both missed the World Cup, which was a shame. Let's pick through some of the rest of the weekend action. You were both at Burnley on Friday night, and I guess you saw what you expected to see.
Yes, I mean, City weren't at the best, but they now can win games in all sorts of different ways. Obviously, we know about their possession, high quality. Haaland's a sensation, but set pieces are a huge threat, and they were just too strong for Burnley. And one of the things that you would always used to say about if Burnley played Manchester City, particularly going back 4 or 5 years, was that Burnley would be physically stronger than Manchester City, but City would obviously be technically better. We've now got to a situation where Manchester City are actually physically better than most teams that they play against, and technically better. That's a real problem, and that's why they won the treble, and we saw an example of that on Friday.
And harsh, I guess, Jamie, to judge Burnley by a game against Manchester City.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about a difficult start, but I think it was one of those where, you go into it, it's a big game, the cameras are there, great way for them to start the opening game of the season, and no one expects them to get anything from it. But interesting listening to the manager, Vincent Kompany, before the game. He was actually talking, we will get better each game going forward. Now, he didn't say that after the game. It was just the actual cohesion of his team. He felt there was a lot of change. When they came up from the Championship, they had a few loan players. They brought a lot of players in. So I think he believes in the way he does things, him and Craig Bellamy on the training ground. This team will grow and get better week after week. But listen, any team that comes up from the Championship, more often than not, they're in a dogfight to stay in the division, and they'll be delighted if they can stay up. But it'll be really interesting how they do, and at some stage in the season, if they feel they need to change and maybe go, not so much direct and long ball, but change things, maybe drop off teams, because they really went after Manchester City and really tried to press high and went man for man at the back.
Cara, that was actually going to be my point here, is that when I watched Burnley on Friday, there's no doubt that they're a good football team. They've got good players, but they were very diminutive as a team, I felt, sort of midfield and up front. And you think that what Steve... I mentioned it on Friday about what Steve Cooper did, and you've obviously looked at Steve Cooper, you worked with him a lot, and how he changed at Nottingham Forest, and sort of, if you like, I suppose in some ways, his values and his principles had to alter during the season to keep Nottingham Forest in the Premier League.
But you think of Burnley.
But how
you can see the 2 goals from his 2 set pieces against Man City.
That's what I'm saying. How do Burnley do that with the current makeup of the squad? Because what I did look at on even the substitutes that came on, they've got a young goalkeeper as well. I was a little bit more nervous about Burnley coming out of the game. And look, it's Manchester City, it's first game, there's no panic. They could go and out-football teams, but if they don't out-football teams and they don't outrun teams, which I think is the plan, and they find out that you go to, say, for instance, a club next week and you think, oh, let's say Crystal Palace away as an example, and you think, okay, this is one we can do well, and all of a sudden you get beat by them, it could just start to set in a little bit. So early warning signs there a little bit for me in terms of they have to play their way, impose their styles. If they don't, I don't think they can change. And you've just, obviously...
They had a problem last season in terms of defending corners. I think they had one of the worst records in the Championship. Conceded 2 goals from set pieces against City. It's not so much with the ball. I'm talking actually without the ball. Do you actually just sit off the opposition a little bit and bring them on, try and hit them on the counter-attack? As you said, they haven't got the players to really go Sean Dyche long ball, put the ball in the box, set pieces. But they really went after Manchester City and left themselves, as I said, 1v1 at the back. I mean, if they're going to do it against Man City, I think they're going to do it against most teams. But really interesting how the results go and whether they alter things going forward.
OK, let's deal, shall we, to finish with the 2 big scorers of the weekend, one of whom were Brighton against another newly promoted club. We appreciate, of course, that wasn't a live game. You haven't necessarily seen that in the same detail. But the easy supposition to make is that Brighton are flying again and Luton might find it difficult. I realise that is facile, but that's what it looks like.
Well, listen, Brighton are carry on from where they did last season. But, I mean, to be fair to Luton, Brighton did score 2 very late goals as well, so it puts a real sheen on the scoreline. But, I mean, in Ferguson as the centre forward, you talk about Brighton bringing players into the club, bringing players through the ranks and selling them on for big money. Now, I'm sure he'll be there for another couple of years, but I think he looks the real deal every time I watch him. And also, don't forget, as a young player, can you imagine the education he's getting from that manager? Because he looks like a top manager, doesn't he? When you see the way the team play, not necessarily with the greatest players in the world, but the way that they play, the football they play. I think he's almost a manager now where a lot of teams are actually studying the way Brighton play and trying to almost implement that into their game. And he's still new to the Premier League himself. So I think the lad he's got up front, I think he's pretty special. I think he's only going to get better with him as his manager.
And the other big scorer is Newcastle in a game between the 2 big aspirants, if you like, the coming teams, Newcastle and Villa. I think we were all surprised by the gap by the end.
Absolutely, but I have to say I thought Newcastle were outstanding. I was impressed with Villa for parts of the game as well. That sounds daft when a team's got them beat 5-1. But Isaac looks like a hell of a player and they've got a really good midfield. I actually looked at Newcastle last night in that 5:30 game and you look at these 2 teams here today and you think, actually, obviously they've got the Champions League to contend with, but they're in a better spot currently as we stand here now, than these 2 teams. And these 2 teams have spent an absolute shed load of money compared to Newcastle, I think. Well, certainly Chelsea have anyway. So I think that where Newcastle are at, they're a powerful team. They're all over you like a rash. They're good defensively. They've got power. They've got quality. They've got a great striker. And I think they were up against an Aston Villa team who will beat an awful lot of teams this year and cause a lot of damage, because I thought Diaby and Watkins up front looked a real handful at times. And I think Newcastle handled them and probably beat Aston Villa as well as anybody will beat them this season. I don't see Aston Villa losing too many games like that. I
mean, Liverpool and Newcastle, that's Liverpool's next away game. And I think you think of the pace and the energy that they play with at St James's Park. And if Liverpool perform how they did here for large parts of the game, I think they'll find it very difficult to pick any points up at all at St James's Park. Because, I mean, you know, Chelsea were good today on the ball, but you just think of that extra energy and pace and cohesion that they have at Newcastle right now. It's a really tough place to go. And Liverpool obviously will have another game in the legs next week against Bournemouth, but that will be a real fight, because you think of these 2 teams and Newcastle maybe fighting for that last Champions League spot, you'd say, maybe to get back into the Champions League for all clubs.
OK, well, I think that has been the first edition this season of the Gary Neville
and
Jamie Carragher
an imposter.
And
assistant to the manager.
Thank you, David Brent. And the chaps, I'm sure, will be saving their very best for Monday Night Football, 6:30 Sky Sports Premier League. But for now, thanks for listening.